See a lot
All
of
right,
sales.
excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce our very special guest today, Johan Vanderplaetse. Johan, of course, is originally from Belgium. He's only fluent in Russian, Dutch, English, German, and French. You know, what's the next language, Johan?
Yeah, right. Texan American, I guess.
We're so fortunate to have him. He is joining us today from Moscow. So with the time difference, you know, he's a real rock star for agreeing to do our lunch series today. Originally from Belgium, he has a legal degree. That's actually how he started, you know, his background. And he continued his studies in Russian language in Moscow. He started off working at a couple of different organizations as legal counsel up until 1998. Then he joined, became general director, and for those that do not know, that's basically the CEO of Alcatel Russia CIS, and later the president for Alcatel-Lucent for Russia CIS and the CEE regions. In 2008, he joined Emerson as VP for Russia CIS and the CEE. And finally, in 2016, he took on his current role of senior vice president and the president for Russia CIS for Schneider Electric. Life is on. He oversees 8,000 employees, 5 factories, and 2 R&D centers in Russia. He's also the chairman of a number of different organizations and associations in Russia and elsewhere. He's also honorary professor in Novosibirsk and Samara IT Telecom universities. I'll tell you a funny story in Novosibirsk. I got stuck in the airport there once. They would not allow me to enter Russia because I had a valid visa, but the valid visa was in a passport that I had a new passport and it wasn't in the new passport. So they stuck me in Novosibirsk at the airport there for 24 hours and only to get a one-way ticket back to Kazakhstan. I will also say he's been awarded one of the highest awards in Belgium. He's officer in the Order of the Crown, Belgium as well. We are very fortunate to have Johan with us today. This is truly to be an international business masterclass. Johan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. And last time I saw Richard in live was in Kazakhstan, in Nur Sultan. So glad to have to see you again virtually. Hope that we will be able to see each other again and in real time, in real life. Hello, Texas. Greetings from Moscow, from Russia. Hope you're doing well in those not easy days, the Corona days, the COVID days. I know it's also hard for you people in the States, like in Russia. Now, let me start by making a plea to all of you. Even if travel would allow it again, don't come to Moscow. Please do not come to Russia because it is a horrible place. It is ruled by mafia. You know, if you make an investment in the company, it will be raided. It will be taken away from you. If you walk on the street, you might get shot. You might get poisoned. And especially if you're an American, I mean, they hate Americans here. I mean, you need bodyguards when you go out on the streets. And you understand, I'm rather ironic, but I do it on purpose because there is a completely different Russia. And one of my frustrations, I'm already living here for 30 years, is actually twofold. And it's now become popular with you know, the term fake news maybe, but when I'm reading even quality newspapers in the West, Financial Times, Newsweek, Time Magazine, you name it, every single time that they write about Russia, it is about, you know, how terrible it is. And I'm not going to hide away that there are very serious issues, problems in this country, and I will touch them, I will talk about them. But the picture that is being painted of Russia in the West is so far away from the reality. Likewise, to be fair, when I'm switching on, I'm at home now, when I'm switching on my TV and I'm watching the Russian state TV, and when they're talking about the West, Europe, United States, I mean, it's not the Europe I know. It is also always about the bad things and the distorted things. And for me, it's you know, it's a mystery that a good term already in the 21st century. We're having that kind of a misperception about each other, which is having an impact. And that's why I think, I mean, Richard, thank you for having the possibility to, kind of paint to you as a non-Russian who is living here for a long time. I mean, coming basically from both worlds, my view on what is happening. Moscow is a safe city. It's a clean city. It is a vibrant city. It is a city which is digitized on a level that my home capital, Brussels, can only dream of. It is a completely different reality with what you sometimes would believe if you just would read the foreign press. So I want to tell my story a bit since I arrived. I will talk a bit about geopolitics as well. I checked with Richard, can I do that? I'll talk about politics. You might say, why the hell do you want to talk about geopolitics to MBA students or former MBA students? I mean, it's a business session. It's because of the fact that it does have a big impact on business. It has an impact on our business here in this part of the world. But lately, I'm actually very concerned about a number of geopolitical trends that I'm seeing, which are having a big impact in how global business is having to operate in the world. I don't think all of the companies fully understand yet the implications, and it has big implications. And I want to talk about that as well. So as Richard said, yes, Belgium, graduated from law school back in 1991. A good part of you probably were not yet even born. As a lawyer, nobody is perfect. It was just 1991, which was the time when the Soviet Union had just collapsed. You know, you remember a couple of years before that time, Ronald Reagan in Berlin saying, you know, tear down that wall. It then finally happened just when I had graduated from university in Belgium. And I thought to myself as a young guy, graduate, interesting, you know, I'm a European. Next door you have this vast territory, Soviet Union collapsing, different kind of republics. I wanted to go there to see what it was, because even then, I mean, we didn't understand each other. Convinced that there would be also business opportunities for Westerns who you know, speak the language when there. So I packed my bags. I moved to Moscow, lived a year with a Russian family, studied Russian language at the Pushkin Institute, and I've been basically, by and large, living and connected to that country since then, since already 30 years, working for the companies that Richard mentioned. During the 30 years, only knew basically two presidents in Russia. You had Yeltsin, you had Putin. You say, okay, well, there was Medvedev. Indeed, I mean, he was allowed for 4 years to play the role of president. In reality, it was Putin which was still pulling the strings. 30 years, two presidents, quite some changes. Also quite some changes since I arrived. When I arrived in the early 90s, it was really the time in Russia of hope. They had finished life in the Soviet Union. They were excited about, scared, but excited about the opportunities. So it was an interesting time. It was also a very wild time in the 90s when the whole, you know, state sector, economical sector had collapsed for some sharp, as they call it, business people. The Wild West, the Wild East. It was also an opportunity to grab at cheap assets of the country. It was really a very interesting time in the 90s. And what I do remember very well when I was still, you know, then studying at the Pushkin Institute was the Russians of my age then that I met. Friendly people. They were all doing an effort to learn English. They looked at the West as, you know, the rich part, jeans, movies, music, freedom, democracy. They did an effort really to reach out to us. While, yeah, in reality, we never really got that kind of an engagement from our side. What we did, Europe, America. We sent a number of very well-paid consultants who had never been to the Soviet Union or to Russia before, who was going to explain how to privatize the economy, which basically was a thing that had to be done, but which was implemented in a completely wrong way. There was a distribution of what they called vouchers to every individual Russian person, which had a value of about 150 euro, which was a lot of money. Those sharp business people, they at the cheap, they bought up the vouchers of that impoverished population. And in such a way, they could at the cheap lay their hands at the most exciting assets, economical assets of the country. And that's the way the oligarchs, you know the term, the oligarchs the class had been created. So in that respect, an observation, and I think it's remarkable in a way, but we in the West, we look into the Yeltsin presidency as you know, the good years. Yeltsin was pro-Europe, pro-US, Western guy. We look at the whole story in a more positive light. The reality is that Russians, they look at to the 90s as a terrible period of time, the worst time in their lives. When I've seen it myself. I mean, there was poverty you cannot imagine how bad it was, while the whole society was unruly with the oligarchs, with the mafia, which was at that time definitely here. It was not easy. Europe, America quickly embraced the rest of the so-called Eastern Bloc. Poland, Czechia, Hungary, they were allowed to get into the club. There was the expansion of the EU. I will come to that one as well. But we never really got this kind of an engagement in the case of Russia. So at the late 90s, we had a very explosive situation in this part of the world. We had a completely impoverished population, which had hopes to be integrated towards the West, but they were having this huge disappointment. You had the violence on the streets, which those days you had. You had the oligarchs, which were controlling everything. You had President Yeltsin, which was, you know, a drunk. He was at the end really an alcoholic. It was a shame to watch his performance on the TV. So it was terrible, you know. And then what happened? Okay, good. I'm a bit oversimplifying, otherwise I can talk too long. But a man appeared, a KGB colonel, who nobody really had heard before, who was not drinking at all, Vladimir Putin. And he started indeed to try to bring some order into the whole story. And I was there when it all happened. And I can only say I was already a business person. I was already in charge of Alcatel, which today is part of Nokia. During the first term of Vladimir Putin, we even Western business people, and then I took the first term 2000-2004, we were very positively impressed with coming from the wild 90s with what was taking place. I mean, there was quite some economical reforms which he implemented. There was tax reforms with a flat income tax for everybody of 13%, obviously very popular for the expats which were living there. But he brought also order really into the country. He was lucky, to be clear as well, because just at the moment that he became president, the oil price went up again. I mean, in the 90s, it was very, very depressed. The oil price came up again. He got resources to do certain of the reforms. And he also went to those oligarchs, which actually in the Yeltsin years was really running the country, saying to the guys, look, we make a deal. You can keep your ill-gotten fortunes as long as you stay out of politics. This was the deal that he basically made, and that to a certain extent is still lasting still to today. I would actually even argue that just like Yeltsin was reaching out to the West when he was a president, during the first term of President Putin, he also reached out to the West. And some of you might know, but when this terrible, tragedy happened, 9/11 in New York, the first leader which was reaching out to Bush, George Bush then, was Putin, who opened his airspace for logistic and other support when the US then invaded afterwards the Taliban, Afghanistan. He did it because he felt it was the right thing to do, but he also did it because he wanted to continue that kind of engagement. What happened, however, is that we have seen, and I speak here from the Russian perspective, right? We have seen in the eyes of the Russians a number of big disappointments that took place. Yeah, and there are a number of them, and there were two that I would like to highlight. The first one is more business related. The other one, which I think is actually having bigger implication, is geopolitical related, because it still has implications as we speak today, and it continues. The business disappointment or wake up call here was the so-called Yukos case. Some of you might have heard about that. Yukos was an oil company which was acquired in the wild 90s by Khodorkovsky on the cheap. I mean, let's be clear, none of them were saints, none of them. Yeah. So he acquired those kind of assets. And then two things happened. Khodorkovsky broke, if you like, the political deal that Putin had offered to the oligarchs. You can keep your assets as long as you stay out of politics. He started to fund certain opposition parties. He was, in my view, entitled to do that, but it was resonating poorly by the regime. But the real thing that happened was, and that's not reported often in the West, was that in parallel, he had, on the cheap, acquired the biggest oil fields of Russia. You know, he was a billionaire. And he started to negotiate with ExxonMobil to sell off 51%, the controlling stake of the Yukos assets, to an American company. Okay. Now you have to understand that the market capitalization of Yukos, even after the good reforms that he had done, was maybe 10% of the market cap that that company ought to have had based on the proven oil reserves that he had. Yeah? So then to sell off all the oil assets of Yukos, 51% control to an American company at such a discounted price was a red flag for the government, who said, I mean, we will not afford that. Okay. And again, I think it's terrible what happened, the way that the Russians stopped the ExxonMobil acquisition of Yukos was crude, was not right, was incorrect. But the logic behind was really, I mean, this is the wealth of the Russian population. This is the Russian oil fields. We cannot just like that, with a discount of 90%, have an American country take away all that wealth. We have to use it for our own development. And it reminded me of something that happened in the same time when there was a Sinopec, a Chinese company, which tried to acquire majority control of Unocal, a smaller American company. It was stopped in US Congress, because no way a Chinese company is allowed to control the assets of an American oil company. Security of the United States is more important. So it was stopped, with the bad comparison, because I know it was much more in a crude, typical Russian way, but there was the same kind of a logic in this Yukos case, and I've never really seen that reported the way it truly happened in the Western press. Another thing that happened, however, I think is reverberating even still today. And I wanna talk about that too, which is yes, indeed, the NATO expansion. It's a sensitive topic, and I have also there heard a lot of explanations. But what happened, and that's the thing that I really would like to bring across, is the following: the starting point of the whole story is that you have the same reality, which is completely looked at completely different ways. That's the starting point. What I mean is NATO. In the eyes of the West, I'm Belgian, European, you know, NATO headquarters is in Brussels. NATO is a defensive organization, the one for all for one, you know. the three musketeers. You know, if we are being attacked, one of the member states, all of us, we will defend. In the eyes of Russia, believe me, friends, you cannot explain it. Yeah? In the eyes of the Russian people, this is an aggressive organization, which interpretation was by them vindicated when the civil war happened in Yugoslavia, which was not a member state, you know, it was then broken up. When NATO bombed Serbia, a Slavic state having very close relationships with Russia. Okay, let me not go into the Balkan War, way too complex. Again, just to understand, that was a vindication in the eyes of the Russians that NATO was actually aggressive, because nobody had, not a single state outside of Yugoslavia had attacked Serbia. And then back to a bit before, you know, back to Gorbachev. Russia was weak. Yeltsin, yes. Russia was economically very, very weak. There was the unification of Germany that took place, that could not be stopped, which was a fantastic thing, you know. But as historians in the meantime also acknowledge, there was at that moment commitments given, mainly oral commitments, that a reunification of Germany would not mean that NATO would then be placed towards the territory of Eastern Germany. What happened since then, I was mentioning, Europe opened the doors for Eastern Europe, for Poland, for the Baltic states, for Czechia, for Hungary, not for Russia, but for all the other states. And every single time that there was an expansion of the EU to the east, it was per definition followed a couple of years later by, we also joined the NATO, those countries, they joined the NATO. Yeah? To the extent that when the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, became member of the EU, afterwards member of NATO, we have NATO missiles which are currently placed at 150 miles away from St. Petersburg. Super irritating the Russians because, as I said, in their mindset, this is an aggressive organization. Okay. No, I mean, there are some parallels often in history. I mean, you're American people, you remember or you have read about the Cuba crisis in 1962 when the Soviet Union was putting missiles a couple of hundred miles from the shores of Florida. Provoked a massive reaction, rightfully, from the American side, almost a nuclear war, because no way the United States could tolerate that the Soviet Union was going to place a missile so short to their borders. Yeah, okay. I mean, in the Baltic states, you have NATO missiles so short, so close to the second largest city, St. Petersburg, and Putin was getting stronger. The oil price had recovered, and he made a speech in 2007 in Munich. Then we have the defense conference, whereby he said basically this has to stop. No further countries which used to be part of the Soviet Union, yeah, via Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Georgia, should become part of NATO, because we cannot feel surrounded all across the world by those, by that kind, their eyes. I mean, I try to, as a Belgian, neutral, their eyes. We cannot accept that. This is when the revolution started in Georgia, when the people ousted the then president. The people in Georgia, fantastic country, beautiful people. I love them. I mean, best food in the world. But they were looking to the European Union. They said, we would like to become part of the EU. And indeed, they applied also for NATO membership. Yeah, and there was this pattern in the head of Moscow. First, a country becomes part of the EU, then they become part of NATO. Now, they could not stop it. And the strategy that, again, they developed is, in my eyes, was a crude strategy, but an effective strategy from their perspective. What they do, they know that European Union will never accept any more member states if on the territory of the member state there are some territorial conflicts taking place. I mean, you can call it low-level civil war or whatever. So what has happened in the case of Georgia, they found two regions in Georgia which were actually more pro-Russia, South Ossetia, Abkhazia. Civil war happened in Georgia, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, or only recognized by Russia and probably, I don't know, Venezuela and North Korea as independent states. The point was not that. The point was there are territorial claims on that territory. Hence, Georgia will not become a member of the EU. Hence, NATO will not place its missiles in Georgia. A bigger problem happened with Ukraine. And I'm starting to come to the point that I want to make. Because there, Ukraine, Georgia is a small country. Ukraine was also part of the former Soviet Union. Historically, Ukraine very, very well connected, very strongly connected to Russia. I mean, people say Russia's history started in Kiev, the starting Kiev. And then again, you had a population who revolted against the corrupt regime in Ukraine. They had enough. And they said, we want to become part of Europe. We want to be a member state. Europe was reaching out, said, yes, let's start soft accession negotiations. Red light in Moscow, Ukraine become member of EU. It will be followed by Ukraine become as well a NATO member. And then the extra sensitivity, of course, is the Crimea, which is housing the largest naval base it was under a lease agreement. Russia leased a naval base in the Ukrainian Crimea, in Sevastopol. And the ultimate fears of the Kremlin was, okay, just imagine, Ukraine becomes member of NATO, and in our naval base, Sevastopol, you will have US, French, military ships. A country which, by the way, has been traumatized by the Second World War when they lost over 20 million people. So there, okay, Crimea was actually historically, it's a special case. In the old Soviet days, Khrushchev donated the Crimea, which has a 90% ethnic Russian population, to the Ukraine, and then the collapse happened. It happened to end up part of the Ukraine. But in the eyes of Russia, this had to stop, and they implemented the same tactic. Well, they annexed the Crimea. There was a referendum, violating every kind of international standards about independent referendums. But even if it would have been a super clean referendum, believe me, 90% of the Crimeans, they would have voted for accession to Russia anyway. And then in eastern Ukraine, which is another territory which has a very big pro-Russian population, also there they kind of helped it economically, militarily, etc., etc. You have the civil war in eastern Ukraine, with as a dramatic consequence the Boeing airplane which went down, which is a dramatic story by itself. Okay, but in such a way, effectively, Russia stopped the move of the Ukraine in the Western orbit. So it is again the same starting point of NATO is completely looked different at. The same way you can argue that what was happening geopolitically in the eyes of the West was an aggressive act of Russia against the West. In the eyes of Moscow, it was actually a defensive act to protect them, to avoid that those parts of the world would become part of NATO and with the consequences that they could not accept. But this being said, this kind of dynamics led to, and now I come to my business part, led to the European Union, United States, to impose sanctions against Russia, right? They said, look, of course, Western companies, American companies, European companies, no longer allowed to do business in the Crimea. You're no longer allowed to transfer technology to Russia, which is helping them to explore the Arctic oil fields. You're not allowed to transfer deep shale oil, gas technology, financial sanctions. Russian companies were added at the sanction list. Individuals were added on the sanctions list. We have to punish the Russians for their aggressive behavior. The Russian says, I mean, we were actually acting defensive against your expansion against the promise that we had received in the past that expansion of EU would not mean expansion of NATO. It was you who broke your word. It is you who are aggressive. Okay. And then I think also psychologically a complete misunderstanding of the psyche, of the mindset of the Russians. Sanctions, yes, were opposed. We will punish the Russians. The only result was that the Russian population, they rallied around the flag. The popularity of Putin went way up. And I can tell you, Russian people, they know a couple of things about taking sufferings. I mean, they, as I said, survived the bloody Second World War. So the sanctions in that respect even had, again, also a completely counterproductive effect. Because again, I've seen it in the government until then, you had actually two ways of thinking. You had the hardliners and you had the liberals, which wanted to engage with Europe or with the West. Because of the sanctions, the more liberal faction has been put into the defensive into the country. But what also happened was, well, we have the sanctions, but the Russians, okay, they imposed some counter-sanctions, especially agricultural products were no longer being allowed to be sold into the territory, which, by the way, gave a boost, a true boost to the development of the Russian agro segment. But they also said, look, I mean, we are going to push now completely for import substitution, made in Russia, okay? And that has an impact on my business. That has an impact on business of American companies. The logic of the Russian authorities and state companies and companies which are in the critical infrastructure, telecom, refineries, electricity grids, etc., it's too dangerous for us to rely on equipment which is imported from the West, because tomorrow the US is going to impose sanctions. We will not get the spare parts. We will not get the technical support. We need to produce it ourselves. And they are indeed forcing companies now to step up their made in Russia, the production in Russia itself, for protecting their own, critical infrastructure, quite frankly. And another thing that is happening, and this is what I'm also seeing before of my eyes, is that they are watching to China. Russia has a complex relationship with China. I mean, they don't really trust China. They had also in the past some border conflicts. They're afraid of the Far East that might be colonized by China. But if they have to today make the choice about importing equipment from the West, or if they cannot develop it locally, getting it from China, they are being pushed into China. And we have been seeing cases whereby customers that used to be customers of American companies, European companies, are now being substituted by either local production or by companies which are coming in from China. I mean, I've been living and working for Nokia, which was Alcatel. I remember very well that in the 90s, my company, then company in Paris, was laughing with a competitor which was called Huawei, small company. We are the big Ericssons, Cisco's, Nokias, Alcatels. The reality is that this company, and that's another debate, but has grown into a technological leader. And if I'm reading the decision of the UK, whereby the British government is saying, look, all the Huawei equipment has to be replaced in our telecom network for security reasons. We have to swap it out. I know what it means. Alcatel, we used to have in Shanghai a factory which was employing close to 20,000 people. The Chinese are now saying to Alcatel, if we, Huawei, is not allowed to sell our equipment to Europe, your companies are no longer going to be allowed to sell your equipment into China. So what we are seeing today, and that's why I come a long way. I come from NATO, I jump into geopolitics, I can continue with, President Trump, China, geopolitical tensions. But what we're seeing today is that for certain technologies, not for all, but for certain technologies, you will have a kind of a Western technology, which is indeed, by European American companies for the, call it Western world. You're having the Chinese technologies for the Chinese and the affiliated countries. Ask myself the question, where is Russia going to end? Will they go to the West or will they go to the East? From an economical point of view, this country is being pushed, literally pushed, to the east. And if I take the example of 5G, yes, Russia is pushing made in Russia, but they also know that 5G technology, they will never have their own technology. They have to rely on imported technology. So they can make the choice. The Russian state, the Russian telecom operators can make the choice. They can buy it from Cisco, they can buy it from Nokia, or they can buy it from Huawei. Now, in both cases, they know, the military knows, the government knows that technology is having, backdoor functionalities, as we call it, is being bugged. They know it, also the Chinese equipment for sure. But there's one big difference. If they buy equipment from the West, today they have no guarantee anymore that if again there is a next escalation for one reason or the other, the European companies will get the instruction no longer to provide spare parts because we're not happy with the regime in Russia. Forcing regime change, which is a fear here. They know that if the Chinese is bugging equipment, the Chinese, irrespectively, they will never put sanctions on the sale of equipment to this part of the world. So this has a big impact. I mean, I know that people say global supply chain is being impacted by COVID. Yeah, because Wuhan, remember, February, a lot of companies had production in Wuhan. It had also in my own company, it had led to quite some distractions and disruptions in the supply chain. We have to diversify because of those kind of risks, the supply chain. My argument is that COVID is not going to change global supply chain. Yes, I mean, for certain critical technologies, people will be more careful. I mean, I saw it in my own home country when with COVID arrived, we could not even provide our population with the mouth masks because we don't have even that. It had to be imported from China. Okay, certain things will change, but to redesign a global supply chain based on something that maybe happens twice a century, like in pandemia, doesn't make economical sense. It is much more efficient to concentrate, in many cases, your productions in places where it is most efficient. Okay, so if you would do that, you will have a competitive disadvantage to the company which is maintaining a global approach. COVID is not going to be, in my view, the agent of change, but the geopolitics, the fear of sanctions, contra sanctions. This is. I know how we have fostered from nothing Huawei as a competitor. It is true that that China has been stealing technology like the raves. I mean, in the case of Alcatel, they were reverse engineering the switches that were made in France. They were stealing intellectual property, etc., etc. It was not okay, and I think indeed we have been closing our eyes too long for it. But there are other mechanisms to deal with it. I mean, WTO, international organizations, not sanctions. If I see that in the case of Huawei, the sale of microchips is being forbidden to this company, it's terrible for Huawei. It has an impact. It means one thing. The Chinese state currently is massively investing in their own microchip component manufacturing capabilities. And give it 5 years, give it 6 years from now, I'm pretty convinced that the Intels of this world, the Qualcomms of this world, will have a formidable competitor as well from the East, which did not exist today, but which we are actually literally fostering. So these are the kind of implications that sometimes I think politicians, what the heck are you doing? Provoking a change which is having implications, and the days when, in many cases, again I oversimplify. I talk really about more sensitive technologies, obviously, but the days where, for instance, the technology could be developed in Silicon Valley and sold all across the world, or the days where the technology could be developed in Shenzhen or in China and from there shipped all across the world, I'm afraid that those days are over. That what we are seeing is indeed going to be such a kind of a breakup of the supply chain, which does not make any economical sense. It does not make any economical sense. It's much more expensive to duplicate or to replicate your technologies. You know, the effects of scale. It doesn't make any sense. But we as companies, we are confronted with that. Now, back to Russia. Sorry that I was a little bit, I hope you're still with me with my reasoning. Back to Russia. Russia today is actually facing Corona, for sure. I mean, we have still today close to 6,000 cases every day. In my own company, Schneider Electric, we employ 8,000 people. We know of 40 confirmed cases. I think the reality is 3 times as high. The economy is economically not in a good shape. But the economy is actually currently in a better shape, or in a better shape to cope the challenges than they were in the financial crisis of 2008, or for those who remember, the bigger crisis that we had in 1998. Why is that? Because macroeconomically, the economy is in a good shape. They have a trade surplus. They have accumulated over 560 billion euro of hard currency reserves. They accumulated those reserves, ironically, because of the fact that they are fearing that there might be a new wave of US sanctions imposed. So it's better to have that kind of saving pot, which they now can use as well to do some stimuli. There's a low inflation, low unemployment. Ironically, sadly, today, the economy in Russia is also helped by the structure of the Russian economy. You have an economy where the part of small and medium enterprises is only 20% of the GDP, which is minimal compared to Europe or to the United States. And I mean, I'm chairman of the Association of European Business. We're also explaining to the authorities that you need to have a vibrant SME sector, because this is where innovation is coming from. It is absent. It is a weakness. But because of the fact that currently 80% of the Russian population is employed by the state or by state companies, short term is protecting in the current circumstances as well the economy. Microeconomically, huge challenges in this country. There is, I mean, let's be clear. We have structural corruption. It exists. I mean, we're talking about that with the authorities. You're having a rule of law which needs to be strengthened. You have all those problems, those things which you read in the Western press are true. They are there. Government is trying to address it. But currently, I think we will not face a kind of an economical meltdown. A lot is depending on the possible recovery of the price of oil and gas, which is now above $40 per barrel. But in the short term, I think Russia will do well. The big challenge, of course, is more in the medium term, when indeed 60% of the income of the state is still based on the export of hydrocarbons. If Europe, which is the largest market, is serious, and they are serious about the Green Deal and about CO2 neutrality by 2050, they will no longer buy all the oil and gas from Russia. So unless the Russian economy is really starting to diversify, I think in the midterm the country will start to have a problem. But for the time being, for the immediate future, I think they will do well. So this is from the economical point of view. From the political point of view, and then I'm more than happy to take any question. From the political point of view, there is it's not so clear. I was mentioning that Putin is in power since 2000. I mean, it's now 20 years. There was recently a change of constitution which is allowing him to stay in power till 2036. The consensus of people that we talk to is that his current term is expiring in 2024. The consensus is it's not really his wish to run for yet another 6-year term and another 6-year term. The reason why he is opening up that possibility is to avoid that between now and 2024 he will be a lame duck president, because all kind of maneuvering on succession is going to already start to take place. So to stop that, he said, if I want, I can continue. Time will tell. But the challenge that we have is, I was starting to say my expose that Putin was genuinely popular with the Russian population because of the 90s, the order that he brought to the country, the massive improvement of the standard of living that took place until the last couple of years. Then it started to go down again. But the argument that is being used by the government is it's better to have stability because see what happened under Yeltsin in the 90s. This argument is definitely stopping to have its power with a population where you have young people of 20, 25, 30 years old who don't or barely remember what happened in the 90s, who don't watch the state TV, who get their information from the internet. And believe me, internet is, you have free access, whatever they say. I mean, you can read super critical reports in the internet space about what is really taking place. So I kind of feel, you know, I call it my cab driver, taxi driver barometer. When I take a cab, I always talk to those taxi drivers because for me these are the best barometers of what is living in a society. And even me myself, I'm really noticing that the taxi drivers are also, you know, starting to change in certain direction their opinion. So we will see if the economy is picking up again. Of course, between now and 2024, many things can happen. But you know, I want to end with the kind of a Russia paradox. Again, I do not want to understand me correctly. I do not want to sugarcoat the situation because there are a lot of things which are not doing well. And as the Association of European Business, we are speaking out to the authorities on that. Just like we are very vocal in Brussels, European Commission, we are going there to say, you know, guys, get real. Sanctions are counterproductive. You're just pushing Europe into the arms of China. Is this the best interest of European or American business? We don't really think so. So we are critical kind of on both sides. The paradox, of course, is that yeah, Russia is popular to be presented as the enemy. Maybe still some Cold War legacy thinking, maybe because it's good to have an enemy because you have to justify as well all the military equipment purchasing, which is you know, as I think it was Eisenhower said, the military industrial complex. I think partially this is also one of the reasons. I'm sometimes you know, puzzled when I see the overreaction about the Russians or hacking the US elections and they're spying on us. They're terrible people. They're no saints. The CIA had hacked the mobile phone of Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. I mean, but we don't talk about that. I mean, that is okay. But if the Russians try to spy, of course, the Americans spy on the Russian spies on the Americans. It is, let's be not naive. That's the name of the game. But freedom of press in China and Turkey is much more challenging, believe me, than in this part of the world. You don't really read about that. You had the case of Saudi Arabia. You know, when this poor journalist was lured into the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, hacked into pieces with a chainsaw, etc. Just imagine that a Russian journalist would be lured into a Russian embassy in the West and hacked into pieces. Those things don't happen, but the number of sanctions and the outcry would be huge. We continue to do business with Saudi Arabia. I mean, that seems to be okay. So there is a kind of, indeed, let's be open and fair as well. Some double standards which are taking place. Maybe last point, meddling in elections. I know how hot this topic is. First of all, I mean, I don't really buy that story as it is. Probably they try to do something, you know, I mean, protecting their own interest. I wonder whether the US in their history never ever thought about meddling into elections in other countries, you know. Mossadegh, Iran, or some other places come to mind. I mean, this would never happen, yeah? But if the Russians are trying to do something, oh my God, we have to punish them, we have to punish them. So I think, honestly, I think it's time to try to get a bit more common sense into the whole debate, to you know, look at it much more sober, to really try to understand that big mistakes has been made from both sides, really from both sides, and that it would be nice to to going for a re-engagement, and we have some ideas on that one. And then to conclude, I started by saying, don't come to Moscow, please, it's dangerous. I really would like to end by saying, the moment that Corona is allowing it, come to Moscow, come to visit the city, go to the restaurants, to the bars, meet the people. They're super friendly people. They are having their lives. They love their children. They want the best. They are not the enemies. They're really very, very, very nice, warm people. And I think whatever we can do to kind of foster this kind of a dialogue, is only going to be helpful. And that's one of the reasons, Richard, that I was so pleased when you gave me the opportunity to present my side of the story, which maybe is also biased, which maybe is also not perfect, but at least to share my side of the story to the University in Texas and to everybody which is watching. Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. I mean, it is really good to hear, kind of the both sides of the story, because, it's true. I think people in both countries probably hear a very one-sided view, and I don't think that's fair. I was very, very fortunate in my time in Kazakhstan to visit Russia on a number of occasions. And honestly, it's one of my favorite places to visit. I've been to the Bolshoi to see a number of operas, and Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg. And it's just a lovely country. And I got to tell you, my interactions personally with the Russian people have been nothing but positive. So, again, that's one opinion, that's one view, but that was certainly my takeaway. The only issue I told you was my experience in Novosibirsk, because they didn't allow me to enter the country, but just a couple months prior, on the same situation, I was able to enter into Moscow. So anyways, quite a funny story. Got some questions for you, Johan.
Yeah.
So, and Johan mentioned to me beforehand that because it is as late as it is there, he does have some extra time. He's not at work at the moment. So hopefully we can run a little bit later to answer some of these questions. So the first question I've got for you, Johan, is what is the cab driver consensus in terms of where Russia is moving, what the Russian government's goals are on the international stage?
That's a very good question. I mean, in fact, we have many cab drivers, so I don't know whether there's a consensus there. Quite fair. I mean, I think the consensus cab drivers, but also my circle of friends, is that people are grinding or getting exhausted by the whole story of the sanctions. I think more and more people also are talking about the war, or the how do they call it, the battle between the TV and the refrigerator. Putin has been very popular for a long time because constantly the standard of living was indeed improving. Today, since the last couple of years, for many reasons, you see a deterioration of the purchasing power. So I think, quite frankly, the population is really hoping that the economy is going to start to pick up. The government is knowing that. That's why they intend now to invest a big portion of the big reserves that they have, the 550 billion euro, into what they call the national projects to improve the standard of living. I think indeed the population is very eager to see that this will happen. And if this would not happen between now and what I think is going to be a very important year, 2024, then I don't know what will happen, but we can be in for a surprise. So this is a bit the consensus of the people longing for a better life. But I think you will hear the same kind of comment or wish in many countries.
Excellent. That was from one of our MBAs. Another MBA, if sanctions are not the appropriate response to the illegal actions of Russia, what would you recommend as an appropriate response that will hold Russia responsible and maintain the most, let's say, safe global economic trajectory?
Well, I think it starts with safety guarantees. It goes back with the safety concern, the NATO concern that I talked about. I remember that in the early 90s, there was discussion of a partnership for peace. That was then derailed when we went to a more hardcore rollout of NATO all the way to the borders of Russia. I think there the politicians will have to find some way to give the necessary guarantees to the Russian state. I think this is going to be very important. And then what other things that we would like to do is start with confident building measures, recreating some trust, and starting, quite frankly, to carve out certain segments from the sanction regime. Yesterday, I had a dinner with the EU ambassador here to Russia, Mr. Ederer. I know that one of the thinkings that is now living and which I support is around climate change. Climate change, just like Corona, is a thing which is not having any borders. And unless we are going to work together, I mean, we will never manage it. Europe is investing massively in the Green Deal, but they also know that if the European companies become cleaner, but next door you're having a polluting Russian industry, it will anyway not help. For people who follow it, the situation in the Arctic currently is very dramatic. I mean, the Arctic is on fire. So the idea there is, okay, let's start to have some selective re-engagement in such a field, whereby indeed for technologies which are meant to address climate change, we can have sanction-free cooperation. We could even allow funding from Europe, maybe from the US, to Western companies which are producing those kind of technologies in Russia itself. Win-win situation, technology is being brought into the country, is creating employment there as well, is tackling this issue. So I think these are the kind of things that, I don't believe in a miracle solution. The mindsets are so blocked in many ways. Even in the European Union, 28, now 27, with the Brexit member states, you're having different opinions. You have the hardliners, the Polish, the Baltics, you have the underbelly, you have then France and Germany, which tries to be more pragmatic. So there is not going to be a one-shot miracle solution, but it will be confidence-building measures. I know on parallel, but now I do become a bit complex, but you have the implementation of the Minsk agreement, the Normandy format, which has to regulate Eastern Ukraine. I think eventually you might think about a completely supervised referendum in the Crimea. If there are Ukrainian people, they will definitely not agree with me. I know it's very, very sensitive, but I think it's a thing which also needs to be resolved, because those frozen conflicts are never good. So that would be my answer. My answer would be security concern, selective engagement, finding ways to restart the dialogue, lifting visa regimes from both sides. As of January, Russia is allowing electronic visa. Back to my point, allow people to travel back and forth, foster cooperation between educational organizations, allow students to study in the West, allow Westerns to study into very good Russian universities. All those kind of confidence building measures, I think, are part of the solution.
Excellent. It's funny. A lot of my MBAs are chiming in now for sure. Craig, originally from Azerbaijan, one of our new full-time MBAs. From your experience, Johan, what is one quality, business, professional, cultural, that Russians can learn from the West and West can learn from Russians?
I mean, I know Azeri people are super smart, and that's a very good question. I think we in the West, of course, we are, and the US is by far the leader in that one. We are having much more a culture of accepting failure, pushing for innovation, allowing a startup. If it goes bankrupt, no problem, you start again, and you start again, and you start again, until eventually, indeed, you will have this fantastic kind of invention which will change the world. So this culture of accepting failure without being punished is a thing that I think definitely is super prevalent in America, which makes you such a strong country, which you don't have here. I mean, failure in Russia is looked at as bad. You're weak. You didn't perform. You didn't live up. And because of that, indeed, this is clearly paralyzing initiative. So I think this is one of the things that I would say. From the other side, what we can learn from the Russians, you know, I mean, unlike the stereotype of a Russian being a person which will never laugh, which is having such a stern look. Russian people are super warm people. It takes some time before you get the trust. Once you have the trust, it is something which lasts forever, which has an implication on business. You have no idea how much time I am spending in meeting my customers, building up a personal relationship, etc. Because once you have that, you don't need a contract. You know, you have a handshake, and that is it. And I think this is a kind of a thing in an over-legalized society that we sometimes have in the West, where, you know, everything has to be fixed and you need to have, I don't know how many lawyers. That's a thing that in this part of the world is not necessary and is actually even not needed. Yeah? So these would be the two things I would say that is that are standing out.
That's great. Yeah, you should talk to our mutual friend Luke Jones on that with regards to why Russians don't smile.
Yeah, you know Luke. I didn't know you know Luke. Yeah,
I know Luke very well, and he wrote that book, Why Russians Don't Smile.
I highly recommend it. Highly recommend
it. Let's see. Ryan Murphy has two questions, but I'm going to ask, just based on time, I'm going to ask her one that's a bit more business specific, which is to protect your company's supply chain, secure from interruptions due to the geopolitical climate. Would you foresee moving all production in country?
No, no way. No. I mean, look, I mean, if we are localizing, we have 5 factories, we have 8,000 people. If you're localizing, there are basically simple 3 main principles that we take into account. I mean, it's no rocket science here. I mean, first of all, the business case has to make sense. And for quite some of the products that we're having, the market volumes just in Russia are not big enough to justify local production. Much more efficient to have them consolidated in just a couple or maybe even 1 factory worldwide for certain technologies. So no, of course, we will not localize everything. Second rule, good rule, when we do localize, is the very latest technology. But third rule, also not so obvious sometimes, if you localize it, the end result has to be as cost efficient as well for our end user. So no, we will not do that. We have a mixed setup. We are having localization in Russia for Russia, and not only in Russia for Russia, but for certain export markets as well. But indeed, what does not make any sense today, part of it is being sourced from our European factories, but more and more we are looking into sourcing indeed towards Russia from Asian factories, whereby, to make it really on top of that complicated, we are now even starting to think about minimizing the American content for our production in Asia to benefit from the de minimis rule, because US sanctions are applicable also to stuff that we would produce in China if the US content would be more than 25%. I'm overgeneralizing, but that's the kind of a thing. So these are all the kind of considerations that we need to make. We are forced to be made if we want to stay a global player on the market. And I want to make sure there is no misunderstanding. We are a hyper-compliant company. We are respecting all the trade compliance rules. We are having a super strong FCPA controls, anti-corruption. There's not a millimeter that we are deviating from those crucial principles. But with those boundaries, if you want to stay relevant as a global player, yeah, there are certain painful sometimes decisions that you will need to make.
Great point. Phil has a question that's specific to Schneider. What's your portion of your business comes from power, energy, upstream in Europe and North America?
We are a balanced company, business-wise, roughly 25% sales is Europe, 25% sales is Asia, 25% is Northern America, 25% is the rest of the world. By the way, super helping us today with the COVID crisis. Q1, when it already hit massively in China, or Chinese results, that 25% were hit very hard. but the business in Europe and the business in the States in Q1 was still running very, very hard. Q2, opposite story. Asian business, China's business recovered, and we are already at pre-COVID levels, while today we are having challenges in Europe and United States. So having a global spread is offsetting and is maintaining a kind of a stability. And then on the business lines, also there we are very diversified. We are having three main lines of businesses. The first business is everything which is connected with technology, mainly low, medium voltage, automation, enabling distribution of electricity from the place where it's being produced. You know, a gas facility, a nuclear facility, a hydro facility, you name it, to the ultimate consumer, which can be an apartment or plugs, or which can be a business center, a factory. So all the technology allowing the distribution is the first business line, which is, I would say, more than around 50% of the global business of the company. And then we have two more business lines, which is industrial automation, process automation, you know, the DCSs, which are controlling what is happening in a large factory or a refinery, all the devices, more and more intellectual devices, which are measuring what is happening in production processes, a layer of software applications, which are analyzing and optimizing the production. So this is the process automation, industrial automation part. And the third last part is our data center business, where we are the leader in providing worldwide, the leader in providing data centers to telecom operators, big banks, financial institutions, big companies, etc. So that's a bit geographically and business, the split of Schneider Electric.
It pays to be diversified, no doubt. I like Kathleen's question. She's one of our MBAs. In one of my previous positions, I worked on shipping oil field assets to Sakhalin, and we had to get statements that the tools were not being used to profit Russia for customs. How have the sanctions on oil production affected that part of Russia's economy?
As I said, until today, what has had an impact was technologies for deep shale exploration, Arctic exploration. Big example hitting back home to you. ExxonMobil, they had a huge project together with Rosneft in it's called the Kara Sea, which is a part of the Arctic, to explore the massive oil fields in the Arctic region. You know, ExxonMobil had already spent pre-study-wise literally a lot of money. And then the whole technologies to support it was forbidden because of the sanctions. So ExxonMobil had to disengage from that particular project. So those kind of projects are impacted, but otherwise today, downstream, midstream projects are not really impacted by the sanctions today.
Zhao asks, hi, Johan. Based on the current global statement, will the globalization continue?
Well, it depends how long you look into the future. You know, when Deng Ping was being asked what he thought about the French Revolution, he said it's too early to judge. And I think it was a very wise word. I think it depends on the perspective. I think globalization will come back. I think indeed we will all realize that the opposite is too costly for all of us, for the people, for the industry, for the economy. Eventually, I think we will all come to that realization. The big question is when. Will it take 4 years, 8 years, 12 years? I don't know. And I think it might get worse, which is typical. It might get worse before it gets any better. And that's why I think it's better to be prepared for a more protected area of deglobalization.
No doubt. Anna Dramain, one of our MS business students, who happens to be right now sort of in your general region over in Latvia, she says, first of all, thank you so much for the insightful talk. I have a quick question. If you have ever been to Latvia, because you seem like somebody who might have.
If I have what?
Have
To
ever been to
Latvia?
Have you ever been to Latvia?
Yeah, sure, I have been to Latvia. Sure, I've been to all the Baltic states. Beautiful. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it reminds me a bit of my home country, architecture-wise, etc., etc. You know, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I would make sure to to tell all of the students that have been on that make sure to connect with Johan on LinkedIn, because you will literally see him of course, maybe not during the time of COVID, but normally he's in a different country all the time, and you'll see that in his posts and all the great things that they're doing over there in the region. I did want to quickly ask if Daria, if you'd like to say anything. We've got one of our faculty on the call. Daria Panina is originally, of course, she's from Russia, and she may want to, I don't know, either ask or just make a comment or two. Daria, do you want to say anything? I want to make sure to give you the floor.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Johan for great presentation. And I really enjoy the kind of balanced view of what's going on, because you do not actually hear this kind of measured response to what's going on in Russia.
Well, that's the best compliment of the day if a native Russian can say those words. So I'm glad.
Well, I'm
glad.
half Estonian, so I'm not
Okay.
completely
Even better. Even better.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daria. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought it would be good to hear from someone who's, you know, originally from there and family there and so forth, and obviously grew up there. So I thought that was important to see if I could get your input. I know I want to be sensitive because we are already 15 minutes over time. Arvin, did you want to say anything before we head out?
Well, I will just ditto what Daria said. I found Johannes's talk incredibly insightful, which only comes from someone who is very seasoned and understands the nuances and the interconnection between economics and politics and the global dynamics amongst nation states. This has been very, very insightful. And you can see why understanding all these facets is critical for developing business strategy, not just for organizations which operate globally, but even domestically, because even a purely local company is impacted by what is happening outside through the supply chains, exchange rates, substitutes of products, etc. So this has been very, very fascinating. The only question I was going to ask you was, and I think you alluded to that it does not take a rocket scientist to show that global trading is better than every country producing whatever they produce domestically, right? I mean, it's been established that there are economies of scale, scope, specialization. So knowing that, politics and religion sometimes interfere in achieving economic optimization, which really has a direct bearing on the standards of living of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been the story of human history over time. And we are viewing things just over the last 20, 30 years, or even last 15 years, where globalization has slowed down, although the benefits of globalization have been phenomenal, but the fruits of globalization have not been uniformly shared amongst various stratas of the population, which has resulted in the current tension and created political leaders who are populist and who really don't care about the economic model per se. So given your understanding of the dynamics as you see them, when do you sense that this period of inward-lookingness, nationalism, produced locally, how far can this sustain itself? Because this is happening worldwide.
Yeah, well, as I just was also mentioning, I think it can get worse before it gets better. a lot depends on leadership, and a lot can change. I do believe to a certain extent in the great man theory, and to my regret, I don't really see currently strong leadership in the world, neither in Europe, maybe not in America. I have to watch out. In Europe, who do we have? We have Merkel, which is getting end of term. You have the UK, which is distracted because of Brexit. You have Macron, which has his challenges with the revolt that you had with the grey, with the yellow vests. I think I don't know how it was called in English. Which, by the way, is a very interesting other topic, which we can maybe the next time talk about, the impact of digitization on society, which also is interesting. So in Europe, I don't see any leadership. Look, I mean, let's say that I have some question marks about the Donald Trump leadership. I mean, my personal opinion. With the dynamics that I was explaining, especially towards China, etc., etc. The reasoning I understand, the way in which it's being implemented is, in my view, not the right one. So there's a lack of leadership. There's really a lack of leadership, and if there is a lack of leadership with economical uncertainty, now getting even worse with COVID, yeah, it's a very fertile ground for populism. Is a thing that we have seen again in Europe. Hungary is an example. Poland is having quite some challenges there as well. France, Le Pen is never so far away. My own home country, it's a big issue. So I'm afraid. I mean, I do not want to make the parallels of what happened back in the 30s in Europe and in the world, which was also a combination of detraction from globalization, nationalism, poverty, populism, leading to the painful results that we have seen. But the only thing that I am aware of is that if even Europe and the United States, with the whole sanctions, threats, etc., are going to stimulate a retreat from globalization without them even realizing that this is happening, and that was actually the core of my thesis today, that we are, giving the ground for extremism to flourish, and that's why I do hope that common sense will prevail again, and that sound leadership will come back. We will see. I'm not too optimistic, I must admit. I mean, I'm optimistic by nature, but I'm worried. I'm concerned.
How do you rate Chinese leadership today?
How do I rate Chinese? Look, I mean, also there very serious concerns. I mean, what is happening with the Uyghurs? What is happening with closing down the society? I think this is clearly a case of big concern. So also there, quite frankly, it does not look too good immediately.
Yeah, that dates back now some years. The Xinjiang region and the Urumqi and that whole area with the Uyghurs, and yeah, I mean, that's a serious issue. Excellent, Johan, man, I owe you one. Yeah. He Arvind, he could have spoke for a long time, I'm sure.
No, I know. This is
on all the the elements that you teach in your class on the foreign exchange and the devaluation of the currencies, and my God, that area of the world has really had a dramatic impact on import and so forth.
Well, once we are past the COVID, I would hope, and I'd like to invite Johan to visit our campus.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I would be honored. Be honored.
That'd be great.
We can always pitch it as an energy visit too, because that is what he does.
We will stay in touch for sure. And with Richard, we have the fantastic bridge builder.
Exactly, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Arvind. Thank you so much, Johan. Really, we really appreciate you joining us at Maze today. Get a good rest this evening, huh? I owe you one.
Okay, take care, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks. You too, buddy.
Bye-bye.